Welcome, everyone, to Mongols. This is our 901 FC Insider episode where we take a quick look at the Hounds' next opponent, Memphis 901 FC. Joining me for this one is Lawrence Dockery, host of 901 Soccer Pod and writer for World Soccer Talk. Lawrence, thanks for joining me, man.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
No, absolutely. I'm itching to hear what you have to say here. Let's dive right in. So, in terms of, both of our teams, standing wise, we're kind of mirrors of each other. We're both sitting in 7th place in our respective conferences on 13 points. So, I just love to get your feel for the team so far. So, let's just start with, what do you like about 901 FC so far this season and what they're doing?
So, I guess to really answer that, I'd have to go back to the off season. And one of the things that there's a lot of people that have over the years have paid attention to the way that I've covered this team. There's at numerous various points throughout time, I've been really hard on this organization, on the way they go about doing things, not doing things, the way there were years past where it was a week before the season and they had like 4 players on the roster, and just stuff like that just drove me up the wall, and it made it harder for the people in the city to really kind of get behind and connect with the team, because if you don't know who's going to be here until the day the season starts, there's no real way to build excitement for a season. This year, this offseason, I think they had the best offseason they've ever had as an organization. And it's a small sample size. It's only they're going into our 6th season here in the USL Championship. And it may not necessarily have been a high bar to clear, but I think they had a really, really good offseason, not just in terms of players that they were able to retain. Obviously, you lost a couple of key pieces from last year. Aaron Malloy went to Charleston, for example. But you were able to keep a solid core of guys, chief among them, Leston Paul, who's been here since essentially day one. He's the last original member of this team. And you're able to get some other key signings, some marquee, some a little bit more under the radar. They hired a new COO. They created the position of COO in the offseason, and they hired Jay Mims from Union Omaha. He's originally from Memphis. Also kind of a fun little tidbit about that is they also, one of the signings that I really did like, they brought in Noe Meza from Union Omaha. And that was one thing. I had an interview with Jay Mims early in the offseason. And he's like, no, I didn't really have a whole lot to do with that, though, funnily enough, which I thought was like, okay. But no, so the big marquee signing of the offseason was Kyle Murphy, who had played here, who had come to Memphis from Miami FC, had been in Memphis previously, and at the time had set the club record for goals in a season. I think he hit 21 or 22 goals in a season back in 2021. It got to the point where we were, after every single basically home game, he was the player they made available to us as the media. And I did like Alex Trebek when Ken Jennings went on his 700 game winning streak or whatever it was on Jeopardy. I said, Kyle, is there anything that you'd like to ask us? But then kind of, I don't know if it was necessarily out of nowhere, it caught me by surprise. Kyle Murphy announced his retirement. And that was a situation where 901 FC of old would have been stuck hanging out in the breeze. Not 30 minutes after he announced his retirement, they announced a new signing. We're bringing in the second or third leading all-time goal scorer in USL Championship history, Nico Brett.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, he's out for the season now. And I guess we'll get to that in a minute. But so I thought they had a really good offseason. Their preseason games, they got a draw with Atlanta United. They got a draw with Nashville. They got a draw at St. Louis City's reserve team, and they beat the University of Memphis. So they had a good offseason, I thought. Obviously, preseason games, results, whatever.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to say results, whatever, when if you're losing, it's a little bit more more stressful. But then they got a decent start to the season. They beat the Las Vegas Lights in the season opener, but then things got a little bit sideways. They lost 5 straight games in league play, but it wasn't. This was one of those things where, like in 2019, the inaugural season, you could say, okay, this expansion team, we're a little bit out of our league at the moment. And then 2020, weird year, COVID year, obviously. I was miserable covering that team in 2020. I love going down and covering games and being in the press box and schmoozing with everybody. I hated going to those games in 2020. Like, I hated it.
Yeah.
Because they stunk, and they weren't, like, at least in 2019 they were entertaining and stunk. In 2020 they stunk and were boring.
Yeah.
And you can't be both bad and boring. But this year, even during the 5-game losing streak, they weren't bad and they weren't boring. It sounds a little bit like if I was watching a broadcast or listening to a radio broadcast from like a home announcer, like in any other sport, if this team loses all these games in the row and the announcers are on there saying, "Oh, they're not really playing all that bad," I'd say, "What are you talking? Well, quit pandering to the masses like this." No. But they were still top 4 or 5 in the league in chances created, and bad teams don't create that many chances. Outside of maybe the first half of the Indy 11 game, which was the second game of the year, that was rough. They looked bad. And then, they got to use the Open Cup. We see this in cup competitions around the world where teams that are struggling in league play can pick up a little bit of momentum in the Open Cup. And they beat Miami United in the Open Cup. I maybe would have liked to have seen them score a few more goals, considering it was against an amateur side, but it was 2-0, a competent professional performance is the way that I put that. And they lost their next home game in league play, and they haven't looked back since. They've had 3 wins and a draw, and they're probably one of the hottest teams in the league. And I think what we're seeing right now is a much more accurate reflection of what the team is, and the way in the way that that Coach Glass and Caleb Patterson-Sewell and everybody at 901 FC came together and wanted to build this roster. Because one of the key points at the media day that we had before the season was, we're not. It's like Kurt Russell in the movie Miracle, right? He says, "I'm not looking for the best players. I'm looking for the right ones."
Yep.
And that's kind of was the theme. In not exactly those words, but they were like, "Look, we tell them what we're about. We tell them what we expect and what we want them to do and what we don't want them to do, and quality, character, and all that." And I think Caleb Patterson-Sewell said, if they don't identify with all of that, then we politely ask them not to come. So I think they built a really good roster, and we are now, these last 4 games in league play, really kind of seeing the fruits of those labors. And, even though we're out of the Open Cup now, but they went on the road to FC Dallas and gave a really good account. All the ingredients for a cup set were there. And it was one moment where you switch off, and it was a 901 FC thought the referee was going to say, wait for the whistle on a free kick. And Dallas took the quick free kick. And Tyler Derrick was the only guy who wasn't asleep at the wheel. But you're going to need the defenders to be awake too, and they weren't, and that was that.
Yeah. I want to sort of go back. You mentioned that the team was not boring during that stretch of those 5 games. What was it about them that didn't make them boring? Was it just sort of, you mentioned that they were creating a lot of chances. Is this a team that has a pretty high offensive, I won't say goals necessarily, although they are on this hot streak. But is it that there is this offensive prowess that makes them exciting to watch, or was there something else about it that, to you at least, made it seem like they weren't boring?
It really does boil down to like chances created.
Got it.
And it's always a lot more entertaining when you're creating a lot of chances.
For sure.
And that's I feel like that's part of the frustration that people have with the U.S. men's national team right now is they win a lot of games, but man, they don't create a whole boatload of chances. They're not fun to watch. I mean, you go into the 85th minute, 0-0 with Trinidad and Tobago, and then you pad the stats with 4 goals in the last 3 minutes. That's not really entertaining to me. That's like, okay, thank God. That wasn't really the case here. I'll give an example. In the games that they have won in this hot stretch, it's not just that they're scoring a lot of goals; it's that they're scoring early and they're scoring often. They went down to Birmingham and scored in like the 3rd minute. They played the Tampa Bay Rowdies here, and part of what helped that was Tampa had a defender sent off in the 11th minute, so maybe the floodgates were a little bit more likely to open there than they otherwise would have been. But there's a lot of players that are willing to do a lot of work, and I think one of the under the radar signings of the offseason was a guy named Zach Duncan, who's originally from Australia, and I don't want to see poached him from a club in Denmark, which was incredibly random, I thought. But he is really he makes the engine go. He is that guy. He does, like in every sport you have the guy that does all the work that doesn't show up in the stat sheet.
Yeah.
That's Zach Duncan. Like I don't know if I don't think he scored this season, and I don't know if he's gotten any assists, but when he's not on the field, it's noticeable. But even during the stretch where they weren't winning games, it's not just that they were creating chances, it's that there was fluidity, there was movement. There wasn't, we've all seen it where, some teams that just aren't good, they can't connect passes. There's always, always one or two plays where you're like, what the hell? And the ball just goes way over here for no reason. And that was never the case with 901 FC. There was always good movement, nice fluidity. I think one of the reasons that they went on that little bit of a skid there, in addition to just, being a little bit unlucky, was there were some suspensions and there were some injuries, and you had, midfielders playing right back, and you had, a lot of mix and match jumble, guy. And I always kind of loathe he's being played out of position. Like, you're not a striker being asked to play goalkeeper. Okay. But cumulatively, I think that does kind of take its toll. But now really the only guy on the injury report is Nico Brett. And it's been, I think everybody kind of knows their role. There've been, I think it just took time for everybody to gel is really, but it wasn't ever, God, what is this? What are we doing? Is it like is the season over yet? Like, no, it was never like that. There was just really, it was kind of bad luck. You'd hit the crossbar, hit the post, world-class save. Defender comes in with a last-second challenge across the 6-yard box that prevents the ball from going in. And then on the back end of it, defensively, there weren't ever any huge major defensive lapses either. There was like 901 FC in years past. There were times where you would go, there is nobody out there who knows what, like, defensively, like none of those guys know what they're doing. That hasn't been the case thus far this year. There have been a few goofy, strange goals, and that was weirdly enough one of the things that at Media Day they said they were trying to focus on this offseason was shoring up defensively so that didn't give up so many cheap goals. For one quick example, there was a game last year. I don't remember who it was against. It might have been against Orange County, where there was just a ball took a freak deflection at midfield. Somebody tried to, one of the 901 FC defenders tried to boot it long, and it hit the opposing team's attacker and ricocheted at like 100 miles an hour right over the goalkeeper's head and into the goal. And that's when it's just like, what are you going to do there?
Yeah, exactly.
But so there have been some goofy fluke goals this year, but I do think they have tightened that up a little bit. And they're a well drilled. Well, I can't, we're still technically a game under 500, so I can't say they're a well-oiled machine just quite yet, but they are coming on strong as a whole.
It sounds like there's a lot going good for 901 FC so far this season. And even in the game that you mentioned against Tampa that you guys won 4-1, there are lots of cases where once a team goes down a man, they bunker, and having the ability to break down a team and still put 4 behind them. I think that speaks to sort of the offensive prowess that you guys are going to bring to the game. I'm curious on the flip side. So, there's always two sides to every coin. We've talked a lot about the good stuff for Memphis. You watch them very closely. What don't you like about Memphis so far this year? Are there weaknesses that you've seen or decisions that have been made? Just where do you stand on that side of things?
There's not really a whole lot that has just driven me absolutely insane this year. There's maybe been one or two times, like I mentioned, there's been a couple of times where the defense has maybe not been switched all the way on the way that they needed to. I think it was the Orange County game this year where I was kind of in shock that they allowed it to happen. They gave up 2 goals in like a minute, or it might've been like officially 3 minutes, from the time but half that time is spent everybody getting back on the other side of the field so that you can restart play. But it was one where it came kind of out of nowhere, and then they didn't re-engage mentally. And Orange County just came right back down, bing, bang, boom, goal. And you're like, wait a minute. I haven't even finished out typing the previous tweet about how the other goal got scored. How did this happen?
Yeah.
But no, as far as like substitutions or lineups, that's one thing that everybody always loves to in any sport. You're never more popular than when you don't play.
Yeah.
Is an old saying. But I don't, I haven't sat there. There have been in years past where I have sat there and gone, well, why is this dude coming off? Or why is this dude coming in? Why? I haven't had any why moments yet this season. I'm sure I will at some point. It's a long season. Everybody has them. But so far, I like most of what I've seen from 901 FC. And obviously losing 5 straight is less than ideal. And there were some folks in the Discord and the Reddit, and any that are always like, oh, when the tactics go from this, that, and the other to this formation, and this coach does this, and Stephen Glass does that, and I'm just like, tactics and formation is really not my like. If somebody asked me to go in depth about tactics and formation, I would probably be found out as kind of a fraud. That's not my area of expertise. But overall, there hasn't been anything this year that has caused me to just absolutely pull my hair out and scream why. I think it's they've done the best that they can, and we're just a little bit unfortunate in a couple of those losses.
If you could pinpoint one weakness in this team, what do you think it would be?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know that I have an answer to match it. I think there have maybe been there have been times where things have not been going their way and they have continued to battle. I would point to the Indy 11 game where in the second half they're down 2 goals and they're down a man, and they kept pushing and kept creating chances and pulled the goal back and had a chance to tie it with the last kick of the game. But then maybe there's been one or two of those other games, the Orange County game, for example, where if they struggle to get something going, they get a little bit frustrated. And not that they throw in the towel. There were a couple of games last year. There was back-to-back at Phoenix and then at home against San Antonio where they lost a combined 10-0. And you could tell once that first goal went in that second game that they just said, to hell with this.
Yeah.
Throw in the towel. That hasn't been the case this year. They just, get a little bit. It happens. If things aren't going your way, you're going to get frustrated. And one thing that I have to watch for as in addition to doing this, I'm also a referee. I've been a referee for 17 years. And that's one thing you got to watch out for is when players get frustrated, you got to make sure that they don't do stupid stuff. That was something that Indy 11 game. Akeem Ward got sent off after the final whistle because he was mad at the referee. And I'm going to assume that it was foul and abusive language for a straight red rather than 2 yellows for dissent because he got 3 extra games out of it. So I would say if I had to pick a weakness, I would say that they could, if things aren't going their way, get a little bit frustrated and get a little bit off track. But it's not one of those where it's just like a house of cards that collapses.
Interesting. Okay. The way the Hounds have been playing recently, I wouldn't expect the Hounds to come out and get 5 goals right off the bat and cause that to happen. Mm-hmm. So I don't expect to see that weakness per se this weekend, but we'll see. Who knows? You mentioned
Pittsburgh has traditionally been a nightmare team for 901 FC. Has 901 FC ever beaten Pittsburgh? I know they played them early on in each of they played them in the season opener in 22 in a game where, we had snow and ice on the field early in the morning, and that was ugly and dispiriting. And then I think they played them in week 2 last year and lost that one as well. And I know there was a game in 2019 where they started the game and they got like 38 minutes of the way through it, and the rain was so bad that they just canceled the game and rescheduled it for like 4 months down the road. And I think Pittsburgh won that one too. But I cannot recall a time where I don't want to see has beaten Pittsburgh.
Listen, man, from my standpoint, every season is a bit of a reset, especially the way the players move. And, you talked about coming in, retiring. You mentioned Nico Brett. We always try to look out for former Hounds and just sort of see how they're doing. So it was a disappointment, obviously, to see that he had a shoulder injury, had to have surgery. He's lost for the season. My immediate thought was, well, what does that do to your offensive output? But since he basically went out, you guys got 8 goals in 3 games. You had that Tampa game that you won 4-1. So you mentioned, was it Murphy retiring? Where are the goals coming from? Like who are your playmakers here?
Yeah, so It's one of those things that it's funny to joke about, even though it doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. Like, oh, he got hurt, and then all of a sudden they started, this. Like, I don't think that's the case.
Right.
That's. I'm sure there's opposing fan bases out there that will eventually make that joke, and that's fine. That's whatever.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's Marlon Santos is a man possessed right now. He didn't score in the game at Birmingham, which I was actually fortunate. I was supposed to be refereeing a tournament in Vicksburg that particular weekend, but half the teams dropped out at the last minute, so my services were no longer required. So I was able to hitch a ride with somebody and go cover the game in Birmingham, and that was a media accommodations in Birmingham, despite the newness and quality of the facility, left a lot to be desired. There weren't a whole lot of people in that building who knew what they were doing and who knew their elbow from their bleep hole.
Yeah.
But Marlon Santos caused a lot of. He didn't get a goal, but he caused a lot of problems for Birmingham that night. He had the left back for Birmingham in the ninth circle of hell, and was just pinpoint crosses, great runs. He got 2 assists in that game, I believe. And then I think in the last couple of games, he had 2 against Tampa. He got 1 this weekend, and he got another one somewhere in there. So he scored a bunch of goals. And the other one is Bruno Lapa. Bruno Lapa came over to Memphis from Birmingham last offseason, and I think was a little bit of a disappointment last year. But this year, I think the combination with Marlon Santos, they got the Brazilian trio of, well, we've got 4 Brazilians on the roster that now. You got Lucas Turchi, who got a goal in Birmingham. You got Marlon Santos, who I mentioned. You got Bruno Lapa, and you got Luis Fernando. And one of Luis Fernando's goals this year came off an assist from Marlon Santos in that Tampa game. But Bruno Lapa and Marlon Santos have been, playing lights out the last 5 or 6 games. Just this past Friday in El Paso, I think Marlon got a goal, and then Bruno Lapa got the winner with the last kick of the game in the 93rd minute. And that's those like, it's just the way they see, the way they find each other, the through balls, like that's in the past, and even a little bit this season. There would be times where see the run. Oh, why like pass, or watch the overlap. There's guy overlapping, nobody's on him. Play the ball that way. And they've been really good about finding those runs and picking those passes out. And it's really, and this is not to shortchange anybody else on the roster.
Right.
Knight Pickering started hot, and he's cooled off a little bit. He did get called up for U.S. U20 national team duty, and he got a couple of goals in the Open Cup as well. But of late, it has been the Bruno Lapa and Marlon Santos show.
Awesome. I have to ask the next question, because I know anytime sort of the Hounds supporter section, the Steel Army, anytime they're watching a game that takes place in a baseball stadium, there are complaints that come from their side of things. I'm just curious, from your standpoint, you obviously travel around, you cover the team in lots of places. Has there been any talk of potentially getting 901 FC their own soccer-specific stadium?
So 2 years ago, right before the first round of the playoffs, when we hosted Detroit City, and a little point of bragging against Pittsburgh is we were able to beat Detroit in the playoffs.
Okay.
Sorry, trust me. It was great because last year, we were hosting Louisville at that same time. And when we saw that Detroit had beat Pittsburgh, we're like, holy hell, if we win this game, we get another one back here.
Yeah.
So personally, I absolutely loathe Detroit. Like the vitriol and the venom that I got, and that the 901 Soccer podcast account, that the admin for 901 FC got, like, what do you guys just showed up? They've gone to war with their own front office 5 different times. They all hate Ben Pierman for some reason, even though he's the only man that made them anything more than a road apple. So I was pulling for Pittsburgh. Like, emotionally, I was pulling for Pittsburgh in that game. Journalistically, I was kind of pulling for Detroit just so that we could get another home game. So it was split, but. So stadium-wise, 2 years before that, 2 years ago, before that game, the city of Memphis, as a municipality, went to the Tennessee State Legislature with what they called the Big Ask, and they were asking. There was apparently all this leftover COVID money, and the Grizzlies wanted money for FedEx Forum. The Tiger football team wanted money for Simmons Bank Liberty Stadium. The Redbirds wanted money for AutoZone Park, and part of that 901 FC was supposed to get $65 million to blow up the Mid-South Coliseum and build a new stadium. And it very quickly became apparent that the state wasn't going to give them the $600 million they asked for. They gave them $300 million or $350. And then it became very obvious that the second richest owner in the NBA was going to bogart all that money for himself and tell everybody else to get lost. Because now, after 25 years in Memphis, the Grizzlies now have a plan and a vision for how to fix all that.
Of course.
Yeah. And as it turns out, that's not enough. They want $750 million from the city. They want $750 million to renovate a 20-year-old arena. Anyway, so back in January, the mayor and the city council said, "Yeah, no money for a soccer stadium." So now we're in this kind of limbo because the USL, even though they've done it in the past and not necessarily followed through on it, they put out that, not officially from the league, but from like El Paso and Albuquerque, whatever those papers are, such as they exist, newspapers still to this day. They were like, "Yeah, the USL said 2026, you're in your own stadium or else." The league hasn't officially said that, but El Paso and Albuquerque both also, like 901 FC, play in a baseball stadium.
Right.
And so I don't know exactly where we're at. If I could see, I saw long before they finally put the kibosh on state money for the stadium. If I could see that coming, I'm confident that 901 FC could see what was coming, and that they have been exploring other options, other avenues, possibilities. And I think this is just this. I don't have anything concrete. This is just where my brain takes me. Is one of the guy that owns the holding group that owns both 901 FC and the Redbirds owns a 4th or 5th division team in England, Dagenham and Redbridge. And he's put the team up for sale. So my line of thinking says money from that, you're cutting the cost of having to run it, and then you're also getting this influx of cash from the sale of the team. I wonder if that goes into a new stadium.
Yeah.
But I would love a stadium because I've covering 901 FC. I've only covered 901 FC on the road in 2 different stadiums. I've been to Louisville twice, and that stadium is cream of the crop in the league.
For sure.
I was also fortunate enough, because I have family there, the NCAA College Cup semifinals and national championship game was in Louisville in December of last year, and I was able to go to that. And that's the kind of event that we could get here. That would be the pitch that you would use to get money for the stadium to be built here. With the San Diego Loyal last year, they kind of operated like they knew what was coming. Slight difference in that, Major League Soccer was, doing like Walmart and showing up and said, we don't really necessarily want to be here, but we don't want you here.
Right.
So that's why we're coming here. I hope Indy is able to fight that off. When it goes back and forth, that's not necessarily germane to this particular conversation, but with 901 FC's operating like a team, they're going to be around for the long haul.
Yeah.
All of these a lot of the player signings, the local broadcast deal, all the stuff they've announced multi-year deals. Yeah. I think because they officially had a plan on paper, had a plan for their stadium that may have maybe bought them some more time than they otherwise would have had. But I don't have anything concrete as far as, because that was the goal. That was the dream, was to get $65 million to blow up the Mid-South Coliseum, which has sat empty since 2007. There has not been anything in there. What with the sewage issues and the vermin and the and asbestos. But everybody in this town wants to say, nobody wants to put anything in there, but nobody wants to blow it up either. It's like, guys, we got to do something with it.
Yeah.
But I understand the limitations of soccer on a baseball field.
Yeah.
Visually, not great. Smoothness of play, not great. there have been any number of times where huge reams of turf over the infield dirt have come up, and I think somebody even created a parody account of it at one point last year. It's a little bit better this year than it was last year. The way that it was explained to me by somebody at 901 FC is that we have a grounds crew that gives a shit. That's what I was told. One or two of the games this year, it's really funny. Somebody made the point. I have never seen a grounds crew have to use a hammer and spike to put grass in place. Yeah. So yes, it's not great, but I do love AutoZone Park as a venue. It does need a facelift. And as far as our own soccer stadium, I'm sure they're exploring any and all options.
Listen, man, I hope that it happens for you guys at some point here, because I think that I love the club, the brand. I'm happy that you guys are part of the championship. I think it's great. I think the organization, would massively benefit from it. So I really, really hope that works out for you guys at some point. We're pulling for you here. You mentioned how you don't think that Memphis has ever beat the Hounds. Give me a score prediction. Is this the week that it happens for you?
If not now, then never. Or if not now, when, right? Because Pittsburgh is typically one of those teams in the top 2 or 3 places in the East, and they're a little bit down, so to speak, this year. Obviously, it's May, and 901 FC is on absolute fire right now. It's at home. It's logically, it is hard for me to pick 901 FC to win this game because, in sports, some teams just have your number. For years and years and years, I'm sure you'll appreciate this. It's in the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Pittsburgh Penguins had the Washington Capitals number for years, for a solid decade, from 2009 to 2019. I think maybe the year the Caps won the Cup, I think they probably knocked the Penguins out. But it felt like every other year you turned on the playoffs and it was Pittsburgh and it was the Penguins and the Caps, and the Pens beat them in 6 games. Like you could set your watch by it. But you know what? I'm throwing logic out the window. I'm being a homer. I don't want to see scoring a lot of goals. I'm going to call it 2-1, 901 FC. Let's roll.
I love the shout. That sounds great. Listen, Lawrence, this has been fantastic. I appreciate obviously all of the insight and the input. Tell everybody where they can find you and find your writings and the pod and all of that. Share your stuff.
Cool. So I have been a writer you can find me on Twitter at LDoc93. I run another account. You can find the 901 Soccer Podcast. It's at 901 Soccer Pod on Twitter as well. I think there used to be 2 or 3 other people who had access to that, but I don't know that they've used it in the last 5 years. So it's my show over there too. So that I also have written for World Soccer Talk since 2014, mainly USA men's national team game previews, but I also do some attendance stuff, some TV rating stuff in there. And recently, the 901 Soccer Podcast is now part of Bluff City Media here in Memphis, which is a kind of a new, about 1.5 years now. And so you can find Bluff City Media at @BluffCity_media. We do not just I'm the go-to. It is kind of cool to be the go-to guy for soccer in a city. Yeah. And so, I do all the written previews. I do all the podcasts, which you can also find on the Bluff City Media YouTube channel. Just search 901 Soccer Podcast. And so, that's where you can find me. I do all the written previews, and I've got one here coming up. I'm kicking around an idea. I'm trying to do a piece on all of the best places in Memphis to watch this upcoming summer of soccer that we got.
Nice.
With the Euros in Germany during the day, and then Copa America here in the U.S. at night, and then the Olympics in Paris in August. You gotta branch out from just doing game previews. It gets a little bit boring doing just game previews. And then if the team says, "Hey, here's a new ticket deal," okay, blah, 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 let me put together a little 2-paragraph deal on the ticket deal. Do a lot of written stuff for Bluff City Media Podcast and then World Soccer Talk. So if you want soccer coverage, coming here, starting probably Saturday, you're going to be seeing a lot of it for the next 3 months from me.
Yeah. So everybody absolutely go check out Lawrence and all the fantastic work that you're putting together. Man, again, really, truly appreciate all the information. Hopefully for your sake, things go well for Memphis this weekend and you guys can, beat the Hounds and we'll go from there. But thanks again, man. Really appreciate it. We'll talk to you hopefully here again in the future.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.